Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be doing something kind of a little bit different than usual. Because this week what we're going to be doing is a mini-series. That's right, we're going to be doing a mini-series, and this was actually originally aired on PBS. It was actually an episode of Masterpiece Theater. This is a crime drama that was called Murder on the Home Front. And this was a two-parter, which was, both of them were 60 minutes long. All right, it was directed by Jeffrey Sachs. It was produced by Christopher Hall. The executive producers were Gareth Nemi and Sally Woodward Gentle. The script was written by David Kane. The score was done by Robert Lane. The cinematography by David Higgs, and the editing was done by Paul Knight. And the stars of the movie, the stars of the miniseries were Patrick Kennedy, Tamsin Merchant, Emerald Fennell. Let's see, we have James Fleet. We also have David Sturzaker, Ian McKee. I can't see this person's name. Oh, Ryan Gage. We have John Heffernan. We have John Bowe. We have Richard Bremer, Susie Blake. We have Rhea Zmitrowicz. And we also have Siobhan Hayes. Now, a long time ago, long before we had CSI, long before we had, criminology has come kind of a long, long way. And long before criminology, people used to just arrest and convict people of crimes. Some of them were legit, but others was just based off of intuition. And of course, at one time, a long time ago, before the theory of innocent until proven guilty, well, a long time ago, prior to CSI, it was the other way around. It was guilty until proven innocent. And if there is no evidence to convict your innocence, you'd end up going to jail or executed. And unfortunately, many people were often executed for crimes that they didn't even commit. Yes, a long time ago, people were thrown in jail only just because a person doesn't like a certain individual. People used to actually do that. If they didn't like your face, or they didn't like your attitude, or they thought that you looked suspicious, they didn't give a fuck. They'll throw you in jail, you'll rot, or you could get executed. And yet you could probably be just a bystander who might be somewhat eccentric or suspicious looking. But, like I say, just because a person may look suspicious does not necessarily mean that they actually did commit the crime. But there was a lot of this false pretenses that did occur long before the advancements of technology, where now we can actually go into much more deeper scrutiny before we actually convict anybody of a crime. But back then, it was only just based on intuitions. I could be rubbing shoulders with the wrong people, or I might physically appear to be suspicious of something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the proof is actually in the pudding. I mean, you have to go in. I mean, in today's world, we don't just randomly throw somebody in jail just because you don't like them. But back then, people used to do that and they couldn't give a shit. But fortunately, these days, of course, we go through DNA. We track fingerprints. We track footprints. And we don't just depend on our assumptions to arrest somebody. And yes, it might be long, it might be laborious, and it may take weeks. And sometimes a lot of cases are left cold. But these days, but in today's society, with CSI, with crime labs around, we don't just arrest people left, right, and center. We got to go through all kinds of regimentations to ascertain as to who is guilty and who isn't. And it all started in 1940 in London during the London Blitz, which was an actual event that really did happen in World War II, during the Nazi invasion. Like if anybody is familiar with the history of Britain, the London Blitz was, sometimes during London at night, the lights would go out, there would be a blackout. And basically, it was pretty much mind games often perpetrated by Nazis. And so, many of them were left with the assumptions. That, Nazism wasn't just, carnage, guts, and disparity. It was also mind games, also came into effect during the Nazi regime. And this actually does come into place with this mini-series, Murder on the Home Front. This movie is definitely macabre, with perfectly woven details, and there's also a nice blend of dark comedy. But then again, when you want to think about it, even shows like CSI, NCIS, the Law and Order stuff, there often at times are some dark comical elements to it, even though its emphasis is crime detective work, but still underneath the dialogue and stuff like that, there are a bit of some dark comical quips. And here it also tends to fall into that annal as well. So Murder on the Home Front is definitely an exhilarating criminal drama that dates back to when forensic science was in its infancy, and the exciting stories that come with each corpse before they settle to their final resting places. Crime labs have definitely come a long way, but with the seedlings of CSI evolved in London during the London Blitz of 1940. Based on the memoirs of Molly Lefebvre, who was a receptionist at the Home Office of pathologist Keith Simpson, Murder on the Home Front is a two-part 60-minute crime drama series, and it gives a glance at a time period that has often been neglected in the history of television. During the peak of World War II, the examination of corpses were beginning to become more involving, as we see the evolution in the importance as what caused a certain individual to die, and definitely dismissing the corpses by saying they were killed is never enough, as these scientists are curious as to who, how, why or what led to these deaths make everything all the more fascinating and inquisitive. Because when it comes down to it, forensic science really would, I mean, you don't just look at a dead body and you just place a toe tag on them. No. In the case of forensic science, we like to know what caused these people to die. Who did these crimes? What was their motives? Why? How did they do it? A lot of questions come into full effect in the field of forensic science. And this is kind of like what happened during the London Blitz. Every time the lights went out, a victim would be lying dead on the ground. But there would be some kind of a pattern. I believe that there would be like a marking on a person's hand, so that each and every one of these bodies, if they have a certain marking on a hand, then that means that there must be some kind of connection. And if we can try to connect the pieces and the evidences together, then we know firsthand who's guilty, and that we don't have to just depend on assumptions or just bad vibes. Because in this movie, we're not just gonna let bad vibes get the best of us. No. The forensic science is going to tell us the whole story, and we're gonna piece everything link by link. And I think this is a great demonstration of the early days of criminology or criminal sciences. This is like the early days when criminal science was actually a science. And it has definitely come a long way. And we definitely get to see this through the memoirs of Molly Lefebvre. So what's interesting is that before crime labs and DNA traces were more evident, the evolution of forensic science definitely had to depend solely on inventive tactics and definitely breaking all sorts of taboo. They didn't have the technological advances they needed to crack cases like we do today. So instead, these investigations kind of had to depend on clues, evidence left behind, and piecing a puzzle together, solving criminal activities, which is definitely far more complex than today with our computers, with our expensive laboratory apparatuses. These things are just definitely, are more legit today than they were back in the 40s. I mean, we had to depend on fingerprints, handprints, markings, footprints, because through every crime scene, a criminal does not always get away. There's always something left behind. There's always that one fascinating piece of a puzzle. And once it is examined and ascertained, then we have our suspect. So said during the London Blitz of 1940, during World War II, a number of single women had been killed. Detective investigator Freddie Wilkins, played by David Sturzaker, believes that the culprit is a German loner by the name of Wilfred Ziegler, played by John Heffernan, and that the bodies have markings of swastikas carved on their tongues. Okay, so it wasn't their hands, it was their tongues. They all have swastikas embroidered, and of course, because of the fact that Wilfried Ziegler is German, and back in the 1940s, Germans were evil. Right away, Detective Wilkins right away just easily dismisses any other full-blown case, and he just right away says that it's Mr. Ziegler. Without any kind of proof, or without any kind of evidence, or without any kind of tracing. He is just flat out assuming that it's this Ziegler character that did it. Why? Number one, because he's German, and number two, because, this is World War II, so Germans are evil in World War II. That's just how they think. I mean, no. I'm not saying that Germans are evil today, maybe. But back in Nazi Germany, everybody all thought that Germans were evil. And because of the fact that this Ziegler guy is evil, only just because he's German, which is in some ways kind of racist. Hey, racism doesn't just come from the color of your skin. It could also come from your language and your nationality. Right away, he doesn't care about proof or evidence if he actually did it. I mean, he may have done it, sure, but there is no real actual evidence that convict this man to the crime. It's just that Wilkins just doesn't like this guy. And maybe he wants this guy to be the culprit, the victim, the suspect. The culprit, the suspect. But there's no real actual concrete proof he did it. He may have, but where's the proof? This leads to the introduction of pathologist Dr. Lennox Collins, played by Patrick Kennedy, who is, of course, the alter ego to this Keith Simpson, one of the early fathers of forensic science pathology, and a former journalist turned personal assistant, Molly Cooper, played by Tamsin Merchant, which is, of course, the alter ego to Molly LaFave. They definitely have second thoughts as they depend on more advanced methods to ascertain as to who is behind these serial murders. That way, so that the police don't end up arresting a possible innocent individual. In an effort to advance deeper clues into the murder, Lennox also has to confront the government, who's willing to debunk their methods just to save their reputation. Because let's face it, the police and the law enforcement, well, they will just arrest anybody left, right, and center just out of suspicions. But just because you're suspicious of somebody, where's the proof? Need I say more? Maybe. So in spite of the dark content, this film is still about characters living their lives to the fullest. Though Kennedy and Merchant lead the pack, I'm not actually going to say that they were alone in carrying the heavy load. There's also a lot of great, fantastic supporting performances. They definitely are equally effective. We have James Fleet, who is excellent as always. He plays the role of Dr. Collins's confidant and best friend, Professor Henry Stevens. Emerald Fennell is also pretty effective in her role as Issy Kennel. So with the horrors of the London Blitz, and that the Nazis were ready to strike at any moment, the energy and the intensity of the characters and the vibrant effects shows people can still live the life even as if there were no tomorrow, both literal and figuratively speaking. Yes, of course, when you think of World War II period pieces, the atmosphere is always dark, gritty, scary, and people are going to be fearing if whether they're going to live to see another day or not. But still, in this movie, we actually see something kind of refreshing, being that even though, yes, the atmosphere is as scary as fuck, you still have to go about in your daily routines, your daily lives. You just can't sit around being scared to death every day of the week. You have lives, you have jobs, you have work, you have school. You still have to live your life. Unless you're a soldier, you have to continue to live the moments like every day counts. Even if you don't live to see tomorrow. You just got to go about your life. I know this sounds a bit dismissive, but what I'm saying is, what happens, happens. You just got to take it like a grain of salt. And the London Blitz was a pretty scary time because the lights would go out, somebody would get murdered, and then as a calling card, the culprit, the killer, would embroider or a swastika to their tongues. Whoever he or she did it. You know, it's always a he. It could be a she. Even though I'm pretty much led to believe that it was a he. And if I'm not mistaken, the women who are killed are prostitutes. So probably we're leaning more towards a he. But let's not assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. But I actually thought that, sure, there's a war going on. Sure, the atmosphere is scary. And in the Nazi invasions of World War II, we kind of lived in a world like we really can't trust very many people. But just because you don't trust a person or you don't like a person, you just can't let innocent people be put in jail just out of suspicion or intuition. Because then there's no actual full proof. And it just does not work that way. You can hate the person all you like. Just because you hate a person doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty. You could probably have some of your best friends in the world who you look up to, and they turn out to be dangerous felons. You kind of have to be unbiased, nonpartisan. And although it hurts to arrest your friends, but if they did it, what choice have you got? Let me go on. It's also the epicenter to use the blackout as a way for deviants to cover up their heinous acts. While the Luftwaffe were up to their evil, criminals were able to successfully get away with murder. So yeah, so during these blackouts in Britain, people were able to give a crime and they could practically get away with it without really giving a fuck. Now the lights went out, I could probably just take a take a rock and smash a department store building and just steal something. They don't know it's me. I mean, I'm not actually going to do something like that, but I'm just giving a hypothesis, so don't worry, I've never done it before. If I wanted to, I could. I simply just don't want to. Like I've always said, people can be capable of doing evil things. I can do evil things. I just don't want to. So while Dr. Lennox Collins is very new to the world of pathology, he is definitely determined to go through all means necessary to cover the cases that are brought to his attention. So with new scientific discoveries, this gives him the chance to prove that his line of work all the more prominent, especially from Professor Stevens. Molly Cooper is definitely a very dependable, important character who's more than just a pathologist, personal assistant, secretary. She is definitely a highly intelligent woman and is very adept at assisting Dr. Collins through his research. I mean, some of his research requires, actually going deep down, opening up the bodies, looking for concrete evidence, looking for something, looking for like what was the weapon used to kill these people, looking deep down. And some of it could be, downright gooey, disgusting. And if you're not adjusted to this kind of line of work, chances are you're probably gonna puke your guts out. But this is actually like one of those things like you really, really have to dig deep down. And though you don't like to look at it, this may be the only way to really actually prove that someone is guilty or someone is innocent. And then we just shouldn't blindly throw somebody in jail just because you don't like a person. You have to dig deep down. You have to put your hands in shit to come up with a reward. And that's what you see here in this. And I got to admit, Molly Cooper is definitely quite an amazing character. She's not just some behind the scenes person. She also gets her hands dirty and gets her hand and is just as much of a capable assistant to Lennox Collins. And even though, you may think that Collins, hey, he's the superior one and she's just a sidekick, but she's not just a sidekick. She's actually really literally assisting him in their discoveries. And she's also getting her hands on in the action in this. And what's also quite refreshing too is that a lot of these male to female partnerships usually often lead to some kind of romantic angling. Well, here, no. These guys succeed in staying professional. That means platonic, which means that they probably have families of their own and that they just come to work, they do their jobs, they go home. They don't stop off and eat dinner and then go and do romantic stuff. Because in the real world, male-female partnerships are only just for work purposes only, and at least this series, mini-series, succeeds in at least keeping it that way. Once they discover a cold-blooded murder on the loose, Dr. Collins, while trying to theorize with his dismissive boss that his tactics in catching criminals works. Sure, it's more laborious. Sure, it's requires a lot of heavy research and a lot of clues. But sooner or later, they will catch the criminals. It just requires a lot of patience and a lot of stamina. And also, you might probably want to have the stomach to dig down because it can get pretty gross. So with their research, Collins and Cooper will have enough evidence that will link to who the real killer is. And that theory alone won't crack the case, and that the law won't have the wrong person. Because let's face it, why would you want to send an innocent person to jail? How do you know he did it or did not do it? Like I said, they always leave something behind. Criminals always leave something behind. Fingerprints, shoe prints. They always have a calling card too. In this case, swastikas on the tongue. And that we shouldn't just depend on assumptions. You may have to get down. You may have to get dirty. You may have to go through a lot of disgusting stuff, but the methods work. I have to give some credit to executive producer Sally Woodward-Gentle. She has definitely praised also the directions of Jeffrey Sachs and the clever script by David Kane. You definitely get an insightful look at how forensic science started during the Blitz and how to this day it continues to evolve. And I do have to say, this is truly a remarkable miniseries period piece where we're not just throwing random people in jail just because you don't like a person. I thought this was really, really, really good display of storytelling. And yeah, okay, it didn't go into the theaters. It wasn't like ever. This is actually more or less a TV miniseries that I was doing a review on. It was just a 2-part miniseries. But during this 2-part miniseries, the story was effective in reaching out. And it sometimes makes you wonder, like, you know, the whole don't count your chickens before they hatch. Well, this period piece really exemplifies that. We get to actually see how forensic science changed the ways we look into crime scenes. And I think this was effective. And I think if anybody who is into the field of criminology were curious as to how their field of studies evolved, well, I would strongly suggest you watch Murder on the Home Front. This really will tell you the history all about looking through science in order to catch your killer. I highly recommend you see it. You probably might be seeing it. If you never got a chance to see it, I would highly recommend it. You're not gonna. It's if it ever does manage to come back onto PBS, because that's where I saw it from. I suggest you tune in and take a look and see for yourself. You'll be amazed. The performances were sublime. There wasn't anything like melodramatic or over the top. It wasn't too sentimental. There are some parts where it's a little bit hard to sit through because, let's face it, digging into dead bodies to look for evidence, it will make you wince a bit. But it doesn't go on for too long. And it's not that graphic. Sure, it's limited budget, but the storytelling is worth your time. So if I was to give this miniseries Murder on the Home Front out of a scale of 10, I give it a 9. Very recommended. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. Or maybe we'll do more of these TV series stuff. I don't show any prejudices. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Writer saying, keep watching those movies. And I'll see you around. Goodbye.